Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's training. I'm Jim Doyle, President of Business Forward. Currently, all lines are in listen-only mode. If you have a question, just email it to us at info@businessfwd.org, and we'll get right back to you with an answer. The purpose of this webinar is to help you to help your employees register and vote. We'll cover best practices from some of America's most respected companies. We'll also share links to nonpartisan resources on the issues and candidates. We also have sample emails and social media posts that you can use. You can find the full employer toolkit on Business Forward's website. That's www.businessfwd.org, along with state-specific guides for Pennsylvania, Michigan, Ohio, and more states to come. We'll publish our Spanish language versions later this week. Before we get started, I need to cover a few housekeeping items. First, as part of the email confirmation you received after registering for this training, it says Open Visual Interface. Just click on that link to view today's presentation if you're not already doing so. Second, please note this call is on the record and there may be reporters present. And last, after today's briefing, we'll send you a link to the recorded webinar, which will also be available on Business Forward's website. Before we get started with the presentation, it might help to spend just a minute on why it can be so hard for your employees to register and vote. First thing you need to understand is registration isn't automatic. Plenty of would-be voters think they're registered, but they're not, and people tend to move around a lot. Second, voting rules are complicated and they vary from state to state. Third, voting in person can take a lot more time than it should. Long commutes to polling places, long lines when you get there. Fourth, would-be voters have a hard time finding reliable information on the issues. And last, of course, the pandemic is making it harder. We'll have fewer voting places, which means many voters will have to vote at different locations than they're used to. So again, if you have any questions about your state or jurisdiction, please email us at info@businessfwd.org, and we'll try to get back to you. And if you missed any part of this webinar and like to share with other business leaders in your network, you can visit our website, businessfwd.org, and we'll have it later today. So let's get started. So there are basically 5 things that you can do to help your employees. The first one is to help them learn how to register, learn about the candidates, and know when and where to vote. We've got all sorts of resources available for you here in this deck. The second is we encourage you to give them time to vote on Election Day. It's incredibly important, and lines are likely to be long. It's a simple thing you can do, and what we found is it really is a big boost to your firm's culture. The third is we encourage you to join coalitions that are encouraging companies to help with registration, education, and voting. A number of these have popped up the last year, building on some other organizations that have been doing this for years. So they're safety numbers, and it's really an important step. Number 4, we encourage you to speak out about policies that can encourage voting and make it easier. We should be making it easier to vote in this pandemic, and in too many states we're not. When business leaders speak out, elected representatives listen, so we encourage you to do that. And last, probably most important, we encourage you to stand up for the voters who are most likely to be silenced or suppressed. It's, in community after community in which we work, business leaders will say it's perfectly okay for people to disagree and have strong disagreements, but we need to be able to talk to each other, and most of all, we need to make sure that the most vulnerable among us get to vote. So as I mentioned before, big companies have been doing this kind of work for decades, and they've shared their best practices with the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. There's a report that you can find a link to if you look at this on our website. But there are essentially 4 lessons that you learn when you talk to Fortune 500 CEOs who lead these efforts. The first is they don't see it as political, and their employees don't see it as political. This is service. Just look at electionday.org or Time to Vote. You've got several hundred companies, big brands, big names, companies from all over the country who are participating. Elections are not helping your employees vote isn't a political thing. It's service. The second lesson, this is really encouraging, we find, is you don't need to spend a lot of time or money to be successful with this. The big barrier to voting is awareness, and the way to overcome that barrier is with short emails, quick reminders, and social media. Those things work. Third thing we found is that CEO engagement is key. If you get involved, your employees will care. It really depends on you. The last item is it can be good for team culture. We have a site to a stat that shows 3 out of 4 employees say that their CEO should take the lead on change rather than wait for the government to impose it. That's up 11 points from just last year. We'll talk a little bit more about that, but 4 simple lessons from companies that have been doing this for a long time. So there are 3 things to do to get started. The first is just to help your team find the basics. If there's one place you're going to send your employees, it's vote.org. It's simple, it's comprehensive, and it'll help them get local information. The second thing that we encourage you to do is look for a partner that reflects your company's culture or your employees' point of view. You may have a lot of young people working for you. You may have a lot of Latinx workers. You may have an ad agency, and people are really motivated by the arts. So we've just listed 5 organizations here on this page. There are more at the back of the deck, but they range from headcount.org, which works with musicians and labels and concert promoters to promote voting. Ignite is led by and for Gen Z women. And then there's Vote a Latino, which is encouraging young Hispanic and Latinx voters to register and vote. Pick one that fits your team, or pick a few, and we've got links at the back of the deck. And then the third thing, which is pretty simple, is just remember the do's and don'ts. The do is to encourage your employees to vote. The don't is to encourage them to vote for a particular candidate. The rules are pretty simple. That's it. If you want to have the biggest impact, we encourage you to focus on encouraging your employees to vote early. Lines are shorter during the early voting period, which is really important for workers with young children, a second job, or going to night school. Chances are your employees do not know when early voting starts, and you can have a big impact by helping them. Again, the best resource is vote.org, but we'll help you to understand 4 really important dates: the registration deadline, early voting deadline, absentee request deadline, and of course, election day. Helping people vote early is a big help. We also encourage you to help those who need it most, and that's predominantly young voters and minorities. We've got a number of partners identified on this slide, depending on your employees. Rock the Vote is MTV. Next Gen America tends to talk a lot about climate action. So if that's really motivating your young employees, we encourage you to send them there. But there are all sorts of other organizations that you'll find here and at the back of the deck. We've worked with hundreds of thousands of business leaders around the country, and they represent a wide range of sizes and of businesses and industries. And what we've found in talking about the election is that people want to get involved, but they're worried about the politics. And the research shows pretty convincingly that employees and customers want their employers to engage, and consumers want their brands to engage. 79% of consumers believe companies should take action. 81% of them prefer to buy from companies that support democracy. 87% believe companies that do take action have the power to make a difference. What we're seeing is sort of a flip in political risk. We've gone from an environment where you might face a risk if you do something to an environment where you're more likely to face a brand risk if you do nothing. We've got quotes here from companies in the version you'll find on our website. We've got quotes from dozens others. But basically, you're more likely to get in trouble if you don't act than if you do. And frankly, that's a good thing for democracy. There are a number of organizations that we've linked to on this slide: electionday.org, Time to Vote, Civic Alliance, A Day for Democracy, Power the Polls. Each of these are very reputable organizations that are working with hundreds of businesses across the country. And one thing we always recommend to business leaders is that there's safety in numbers. If you want a reliable partner, if you want to speak out, these are places where you can start. A big way to help, and it requires a personal commitment, is to become a poll worker or a poll watcher. So just first, what's the difference? Poll workers are trained by local election boards to identify problems and serve at polling places on election day. It's a nonpartisan role that simply works to ensure a successful election process. You help count the votes. Poll watchers, on the other hand, are recruited by the political parties to protect people casting their vote. They monitor incidents of voter intimidation and work with voters and election officials to address problems at the polls. Because of the pandemic, we encourage you to strongly consider becoming a poll worker, and we encourage you to encourage your employees to do so as well. And here's why. 6 out of 10 poll workers are 60 years or older, and those are Americans who are less likely to be able to work safely at the polling places because of COVID-19. So what we need to do is we need to replace a lot of these older workers with younger ones. And I say workers, not volunteers, because in most jurisdictions, these are paid positions. So if you really want to get involved and you really want to have an impact, one of the biggest things you can do is be a poll worker or help those around you become poll workers. You'll see here links to Power the Polls, a nationwide organization which will help you find the resources and where to sign up in your jurisdiction. It's a great organization, again, working with some of the biggest companies in the world, and we encourage you to get involved. And finally, what we wanted to do was talk a little bit about mail-in voting, just to help you answer any questions your employees might have. The first thing you need to understand about mail-in voting is 1 in 4 Americans did it in the last election. 28 states encourage vote by mail without asking for a reason, and it's enjoyed bipartisan support for years. This has never been controversial before, and it shouldn't be controversial now. The 5 states that vote exclusively by mail have higher turnout and lower cost than other states, and they have very, very little voting fraud, 0.001%, according to the latest report, and which means that of the 11 million ballots cast, they found 112 cases of potential fraud. The big point to make here is that there's a risk of fraud and then there's a risk of error. And frankly, there's a greater risk of both with in-person voting than there is in mail-in voting, mostly because voters often show up at the wrong polling location, whereas people who vote by mail, the ballot comes directly to them. So if you're hearing a lot of questions about whether mailing in a voting is legitimate, it is. It has been. It's successful. It's safe. And frankly, there's more risk of error when people go to a polling place on their own. So we encourage your employees to vote by mail, but of course to encourage them to do so early. So I've mentioned before there are a number of organizations that can help. On this slide we linked to organizations that help with registration. With Ballot Ready and Ballotpedia, you can get information about candidates and issues. There's also the League of Women Voters, which has great resources. If you want to know when, where, and how to vote, go to vote.org. And then there are a number of organizations helping with voter access, from VoteSafe to the Fair Election Center to Fair Fight, ACLU, When We All Vote, and Voters Not Politicians. Plenty of resources. Just take a look, and if there's something that speaks to you, we encourage you to share it with your employees. What we have here is a sample email that you can send to your employees to make sure they know about when election day is and their options. If you'd like more tools, templates, we've got them on our website. Again, the great news here is this is a problem of awareness, and the best way to address that is with simple emails and social media posts and encouragement from CEOs like you. So thank you very much for participating. If you have any questions, please email them to us at info@businessfwd.org. You'll have a more complete training manual on our website, including state-specific versions and the Spanish language versions, and we'll be making a copy of this webinar available on our website later today. So thank you very much for joining us. We really appreciate it.